Nō reire Tiwi, it's time now for our studio interview with Jodie.
Kia ora, Scotty. Delay tactics employed in the House last week put pay to the third and final reading of the Taku Tai Moana Bill. Thursday is now being touted as the closest parliamentary date for the controversial bill. Joining me today is Dr. Rawiri Taonui. Kia ora.
Kia ora, kia ora.
Now, first of all, you've come from Christchurch.
Yes.
How is your whānau?
Oh, my whānau's good, thank you. It's the first few days after the earthquake were quite trying and took a little while to round them up, but we're coping well now.
And you've had time to actually analyse the Taku Tai Moana Bill. You said before that Labour's deal wasn't bad, but this deal is better. Can you explain for us what you mean by that?
Well, I have said previously that the Taku Tai Moana has the potential to be better than the 2004 Act in terms of the options around development and so on and so forth. But largely, without the amendments that were recommended during the Select Committee process, it's not very different. And there are some real vulnerabilities in there for Māori.
What is it exactly at this point? Why is it not good?
Well, I think the main thing is that Māori wanted the right to go to the courts to and have the courts decide on customary title, but the main problem with the Act as it stands is that customary title has been defined by the Crown, by government in the legislation, whereas usually the process is that the case would go to the courts and the courts would define what customary title means and how it would apply today, and they're independent, and that independence is lacking.
Is this almost like modern day confiscation?
Well, it probably amounts to that, because the courts would be unable to call on precedents in other common law, such as state-owned enterprise case, some overseas cases like Wick, Mabo in Australia, Delgamukwe in Canada, some important cases in South Africa. They're excluded from doing that. So really, it's not much different than 2004. Why
do you think those international pieces of law that you mentioned have been completely ignored?
Well, I think the government is concerned that the courts might go too far and that they won't be able to cope with that. My personal feeling is that the New Zealand Supreme Court has an able set of justices that sit on it, and they would do a good job, and personally I think that that is the best place to go. And then you have the political process afterwards which says, well, this is what customary title means today, this is what it was in 1840, and how do we deal with that, how do we negotiate it in today's environment? And the Crown seems very worried about doing that.
Do you think Māori actually have the means to go to Supreme Court, and how do you see that unfolding?
Well, the Act allows them to go to the courts, but the courts are restrained in what they can do. And so while the promise has always been to return to Māori the right to go to the courts, it's only something that's been achieved in name rather than substance.
Do you think the bill actually acknowledges the Treaty of Waitangi or the treaty principles?
Well, I think one of the other problems with the bill is the way that it's drafted. The bill says that the legislation should acknowledge the treaty rather than have regard to the principles, and that's quite a step down, and I think that that's an area where Māori are quite vulnerable.
The UN Special Rapporteur who came here, he describes it as treaty vulnerability. Yes. What does that mean exactly?
Well, what he's saying is essentially that the courts are the right place to settle this in terms of defining customary title, but the lack of constitutional protection for the treaty means that whenever these issues come up, they're subject to a political rather than an independent and justice-focused process. And that's what he said in his most recent report.
The substance of the bill is about restoring a right to access courts, but in name only.
Yes.
When they talk about in name only, what does that mean?
Well, that's my analysis, and what I'm saying is that while a right to go back to the courts has been restored, that is in name only, and it lacks substance because the courts are restrained in terms of what they can decide.
The Māori Party aren't exactly out there celebrating in the streets about this. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's been very difficult to understand why they continue to support the bill. Obviously, it was really important to them in 2004, but of course one of the things they said during the select committee process was that if an overwhelming number of Māori opposed the bill, then they would withdraw their support. Now, 71 of 72 iwi submissions were opposed to the bill, and 70% of those said delay it. Now, when you ask why are they continuing to support it, I suppose the criticism that can be made is that in some ways the Māori Party is too wedded to the idea of just obtaining a simple utu over Labour in terms of what they did in 2004, but perhaps also too wedded to the relationship with National and losing sight of the longer-term picture. And then, you know, you could say perhaps also too wedded to power.
Not a lot of people have actually come out and said that about the Māori Party. Do you think it will have damage to them coming up to the election?
Yes, I think so. The recent Horizon Māori Research poll showed that 40% of Māori were opposed to the legislation. Other polls have also showed that over 50% of Māori now have reservations about the relationship with National, and I think that has the potential to hurt them at the next election.
The Hikoi protest, do you think it'll have any impact?
Well, I'm flying up to Wellington on Tuesday to lend my support. I don't think it's going to have the massive numbers that the 2004 Hikoi did. I think there's a number of reasons for that. On one hand, it's anathema to Māori to go and protest essentially against a Māori political vehicle, and I think a lot of people are still mystified and in a sense in a state of shock in terms of what's in the bill and why it's going forward. But I think it'll make a statement.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, Rawiri, and we look forward to talking to you about this again in the future.
Thank you.
Kia ora.
Thank you. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Scotty.
Jody Rawiri tēnā rā kōrua.